My name is Muna Kangson. I'm the Manager of Communications, Programs and Events for the Cambridge Public Library. On behalf of our administration and staff, I would like to welcome you to tonight's event. Our guest today is author Stephanie Gayle. Stephanie grew up in Massachusetts. She graduated from Smith College. She currently works at the MIT Media Lab in the finance department. Stephanie's hobbies include baking, awesome, reading, yoga, knitting, and playing games. She's quite competitive. Stephanie's mystery books include Idyll Threats, Idyll Fears, and Idyll Hands. Her first novel, My Summer of Southern Discomfort, was chosen as one of Redbook's top 10 summer reads. Her short fiction and non-fiction have appeared in Kenyon Review Online, the Potomac Review, Punchnel, and several other publications. She's twice been nominated for Pushcart Prize. It is my pleasure to welcome Stephanie Gayle to the Cambridge Public Library.
Good evening, and thank you for coming. I admire anyone who leaves their home to come to events in winter. I am sure that your bodies urged you to stay home or indoors, but you persisted. I'd also like to thank the Cambridge Public Library for hosting me and for steadily showing my faces on their screens so that my friends keep telling me, I saw you at the Cambridge Public Library, and they confuse me because I think, when? I was there Saturday, but I wasn't there yesterday, until I realize that they keep meaning the event's advertisements screens. So tonight I'm going to read a few excerpts from my latest mystery, Idyll Hands, which is the third in my Thomas Lynch series. And I'm going to talk about what inspired it, but because I am currently listening to a lot of true crime podcasts, especially my favorite murder episodes, I am also going to talk about one of the most famous cases of a missing woman in history. It's the story of Agatha Christie. Yes, that Agatha Christie. Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire, author of the world's longest running play, The Mousetrap, writer of 66 novels, and of 14 short story collections. She also wrote 6 romances under a pen name Mary Westmacott, which will be important later. Her novels have sold about 2 billion with a B copies. She is the most translated individual author in the world. But first, before we talk about Christie's news-grabbing disappearance, let's talk missing persons in general, because that's what inspired me to write Idyll Hands. I have always been preoccupied with the idea of missing people, probably in part because I came of age during a time when news about missing kids, such as Adam Walsh, grabbed national headlines and spurred the creation of stranger danger programs that involved having a local policeman visit your school and warn you not to get into cars with strangers who offered you candy. I have always had a major sweet tooth, so this advice was warranted. The police would tell us to invent a secret safe word that any friend of the family had to know in order to, say, pick you up from school. I seriously think that school administrators and local police seriously overestimated kids' abilities to create unique, unguessable passwords. I guarantee you that half of those passwords were the following: teddy bear, unicorn, name of family pet. TV shows at this time also aired very special and scarring episodes aimed at teaching children how not to get abducted. This all made its way into my subconscious, where it has been hanging out with the lyrics to the Gummy Bears cartoon and the Hokey Pokey dance routine. So for many, many years. So when I started writing the third book in my series, I knew that I wanted to write about missing persons, but not young children, because I've done that in book 2, Idyll Fears. I wanted older persons, so I picked a teenage girl and a 20-year-old woman, in part for plot reasons, because there is no database for missing adult people the way there is for missing children. Not at all. Why? In part because they assume that many adults leave their homes or lives of their own volition and that there's no foul play involved, so it's okay not to track them through a database. I have mixed feelings about this. It is impossible to know what percent of missing adults leave their home of their own accord and are fined if you are not tracking them. So, also, it turns out that many persons, such as people addicted to drugs or sex workers, who go missing aren't very actively pursued by the police or searched for. And I suspect that very many of them are not okay ultimately, especially after I watched The Killing Season, the documentary, in which it is revealed just how many people on the fringes of society can be murdered before people pay attention. It's an excellent but terrifying documentary if you're interested. So my fascination with missing persons has a lot to do with the fallout that occurs afterwards. How does a family member or a friend move on without knowing what happens? How do they keep from imagining the worst? Do they hold out hope? And do they ultimately forget, and how guilty do they feel when they remember? There are just so many questions. In my book, I made the missing teenager be the sister of one of the police detectives, Michael Finnegan, and I gave him a first-person point of view in this novel, which is new to the series. In the past, only the police chief, Thomas Lynch, has had a written point of view. So I'm going to read you a short excerpt from Idyll Hands, in which I explore a little bit of the emotional fallout. And in this scene, the Idyll police detectives, Michael Finnegan and Lewis Wright, are visiting the house of a dentist, Dr. Forrester, who they believe can help identify a recently unearthed corpse. The dentist hasn't been very forthcoming or helpful, so they've driven to his home unannounced in order to get him to share the x-rays that they're looking for. So this is in Michael Finnegan's point of view. Outside Dr. Forrester's shingle cabin were two no trespassing signs posted on a waist-high fence. A security camera was installed near the front door. Beside the door was a no soliciting sign. There was no doorbell, but there was a heavy old brass knocker. I pumped it against the door and waited. When the door opened, a short, grizzled man with dirty eyeglasses sized us up and barked, "Can't read?" He pointed to the no soliciting sign. He aimed the comment at Lewis. "Oh, hell. Please tell me this bastard wasn't racist." Lewis didn't blink. He said, "I read very well, thank you. I'm not soliciting. I'm a detective with the Idyll Police. My name's Lewis Wright. May I come in?" Dr. Forrester said no, like it was a reflex. "Would you come outside and answer a few questions for me? It's about Elizabeth May Gardner." I told that state cop who called earlier that the x-rays are in storage. He adjusted his neck so as to keep both of us in sight. I walked to the side to make the task impossible. I said, "The thing is, it seems very likely that a skeleton we've discovered is Elizabeth. What do you need her dental x-rays for?" He looked away from me to Lewis. "Proof. I want proof before I go to her parents and raise their hope for the umpteenth time. They've looked at other bodies that weren't their daughter, and I don't want to do that to them again." "Do you have children?" Lewis asked him. "No." "Ever had your hopes dashed?" I asked. He shuffled his socked feet and said, "Sure." I said, "Okay. Well, imagine all of your hopes, all of your dreams, all of your energy is focused on one thing. It's not even a nice thing. It's this. You want your child's body back so you can bury it, so that you can say goodbye, so that you can sleep and not dream of the terrible ways in which she's being tortured as you sleep in your own bed, in your own home, safe, so that you can have conversations that aren't interrupted with thoughts about where she might be and who might be holding her, and what he's forcing her to do again, and whether she thinks you've given up on her for good. Enough." He held up his hand to ward me off. "Enough. God, get the x-rays." He moved out of sight, but he didn't close the door. I wondered if the storage unit was far away and how long it would take to get there. He reappeared, a manila folder in hand. The peeling label on it read, "Gardner, Elizabeth M." He opened the glass door and thrust it at me. I blurted, "You had it here?" "Take it." He waved the folder like I was a fish and the folder was a worm. So much of what I wanted to explore is how awful it must be not to know what's happened to your loved one who's gone missing. It is triply bad for Michael Finnegan since he was a rookie cop in Boston when his sister first went missing. But she had run away from home 2 years before, and come back within a few days, so he didn't involve his police colleagues because he didn't want to waste police resources. Only now, it's 27 years later, and he regrets that decision every day of his life. A lot of writing fiction is making your characters suffer, and I am very good at it. So speaking of suffering, let's turn to our girl, Agatha Christie. She was 36 years old on Friday, December 3rd, 1926, when, at 9:30 p.m., she kissed her sleeping daughter Rosalind goodnight. Rosalind was 7 years old at the time. Mrs. Christie then walked downstairs, went outside, got into her car, and drove off, leaving a letter to her secretary saying she was going to Yorkshire. Her car, a Morris Cowley, was found the following morning near Silent Pool. The car was on an embankment and it had its rear wheels in the air. The lights were on and the driver's doors were open. Clothing was tossed about on the rear seats, and her expired driver's license was found on scene. At the time of her disappearance, her 6th novel, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, was selling well. Everyone knew who she was. She was the J.K. Rowling of her time. Police, tracker dogs, and thousands of volunteers searched the surrounding land for days. The nearby lake was dragged for a body, and planes, remember this is 1926, were used for the first time in a missing persons case. William Joynson Hicks, who was the Home Secretary at the time, told the police to hurry up and find her. Also very famous authors, Dorothy Sayers and Conan Arthur Doyle, tried to help with the search. So Conan Arthur Doyle, you may or may not know, was very interested in fairies and mediums and psychics. And so he took a pair of gloves found in the car that she abandoned, or was taken from, and he gave them to a famous psychic, but nothing came of that. Sayers visited the scene hoping to give them some idea around the clues, but she came up short as well. So everyone was following this story, remember? 1926, no Netflix, no TV. This is a gripping story you have to follow via the newspapers. And there was a reward of £100 offered for information leading to her discovery. The odd thing about missing persons cases is that the person who is missing is voiceless. You can't hear from them. If you did, you'd know the person was alive. A truly missing person is silent and becomes something of a blank slate. It's like when someone dies and you hear varied opinions of them, from family, friends, and sometimes near strangers. In writing Idyll Hands, I decided that I wanted to give voice to one of the 2 missing women. I started the book with Susan Finnegan, who is 16 years old at the time. And I wanted to imagine what it's like to have a secret and to plan an escape all the while you're surrounded by your family. In earlier drafts of this book, actually, Susan had multiple point of view scenes, but the later ones blurred. I think I wrote one in present tense, which was crazy. And then I decided that dipping in and out of time can confuse the reader and the author. So ultimately it was the first scene, the departure scene, that matters the most, and it's the one that stayed in the book. And it's actually told in omniscient point of view. Stretch those authorly wings. I can do more than first person, I just generally choose not to. Friday, September 22nd, 1972, Charlestown, Massachusetts. She watches the clock, checking the second hand to see if it's time to go yet. Her freckled hand trembles as it brings a fork full of mashed potatoes to her mouth. She sets it down. The fork clanks against the dinner plate's blue rim, and her mother's eyes are on her. Not hungry? Her mother assesses the plate. Peas untouched, potatoes furrowed by fork tines, meatloaf covered in ketchup to conceal only a small piece has been consumed. She tries to smile, but her cheeks feel tight. Guess I ate too many chips. She looks up the small sin, as she may be forgiven the larger one coming. She touches the chipped crystal salt and pepper shakers. Years ago, she and her siblings had held the crystal shakers up to sunbeams to create rainbows. Rainbow makers, they call them. Can you pass me the rainbow maker? They'd say at dinner, and their parents would exchange confused glances. And they'd laugh, giddy in the power of their shared secret. Secrets are not so nice now. They are dark and make her feel sick. Her father at the head of the table says, "Drink your milk." He doesn't look up, but she knows the remark is aimed at her. Do you think her parents worked a dairy farm the way they push milk? She lifts the sweating glass and swallows a mouthful. It is cold and wet and tastes like soap. Someone didn't rinse the dishes well. It wasn't her, not this time. She pokes at the meatloaf and watches her brother Bobby eat. He's the only one left at home with her. Her other brothers and sisters have grown up and moved to their own places. He will leave too in a year or so. Bobby shovels potatoes and peas in his mouth, then he chews and chews, 20 times at least, before he swallows. Has he always done this? He is the brother who scared her with stories of the boogeyman when she was little, who told her there were monsters under the bed. But he is the same brother who saved her from choking, who stuck his grubby index finger down her throat and fished out the butterscotch candy, blocking her airway. Tears come to her eyes, and she blinks them away. They cannot see her cry. They'll know something is up. She pinches the web of skin between her left index finger and thumb. Her mother asks Bobby about his job, and he talks about a customer who didn't know the difference between a spark plug and she drifts off. Her father's fingers are stained brown at the tips, and his hair is going gray. Even his mustache is streaked with silver. He would die if he knew what she was about to do. It would kill him. She bites down until her front teeth indent her lower lip, and then she asks, "May I be excused?" Both parents eye her plate, both frown. Her mother is about to tell her to eat more. "I told Lucy I'd meet her at 6:30. When they don't respond immediately, she adds, "I'm sleeping over, remember?" "What you doing?" Bobby asks. "We're going to a double feature." She twists the napkin in her lap, strangling the fabric. Thank God she checked the paper for this weekend's listings. The last house on the left, and then Bluebeard. "Double feature," her father says. "Is Mr. McManus picking you up?" "Yes." She pictures Mr. McManus, reading the paper in his recliner, balancing a cigarette on his lower lip. He won't be picking her up from the movies. Not tonight. She prays her father won't argue, that she won't have to explain again that she was 16 years old enough to go to the movies with her best friend. She doesn't want to argue that she can be trusted. She's not sure the lie would make it out of her mouth. He sighs, but she recognizes the hollow sound in it that means he will give in. Her mother looks at her father. He sets the rules. He nods. Her mother says, "Be careful." She rises from her chair. The smell of her mother's perfume, wind song, makes her wince. She used to love the smell, but now it makes it queasy. "Clean your plate," her mother says. She takes the plate into the kitchen and scrapes her food into the trash, the potatoes sticking, refusing to budge until she pushes them with her knife. They land atop empty cans and cigarette packets and discarded circulars. She sets the plates and utensils in the sink where her mother will wash them using Palmolive. Her mother wears bright yellow gloves to prevent dishpan hands. She hums songs as she washes, Simon and Garfunkel, or She Loves You by the Beatles. The girl's eyes water and she blinks fast. On the yellow fridge is a picture of her and her siblings 2 Christmases ago. They are arranged before the Christmas tree. Bobby has his arm wrapped around her neck, and Dave is making rabbit's ears behind Mikey's head. Carol ignored them all, posing. Her pregnant belly upstaged her smile. The girl will not allow herself to think of her nephew, Jimmy. Not now. She grabs her knapsack from outside her bedroom. She will be gone 2 days, she tells herself. Only 2 days. And then she'll be back, and it will be okay. Things will be okay. She calls, "See you later," and hustles downstairs, her feet thumping heavy on each step. Then she's outside, and the sun is sinking, and the air smells like hot dogs and lighter fluid. The neighbors are grilling, though the air is nippy, and it's past grill season. She sets her eyes to the road ahead and counts every car that passes. It keeps her from looking backward to thinking of what lies ahead. It keeps her centered and present in the moment. That's what she must be. She pushes her long hair behind her and leans forward as she walks, away from home and her life before. When she returns on Monday, it will be fixed, and everything can go back to the way it was. So missing people know where they've gone to, but those they leave behind are left with questions. The same was true when Agatha Christie went missing. Many thought she had drowned herself in Silent Pool, which was rumored to be a spring where a young girl and her brother had died, so there were already spooky feelings about it. Others thought that her cheating husband, Archie, was responsible. Still others thought it was a giant publicity stunt meant to increase book sales. The difference in searching for someone like Agatha Christie, a demure mortal, is quite pronounced, as you can imagine. The resources used to find Mrs. Christie were vast, and she was famous, so people wanted to help find her. Everyone was keeping their eyes peeled, hoping to be the one, and not just for the reward. I mean, imagine it, strolling about on a walk to the post office and you see her. That's not where she was found, by the way, but I am making a point. It would be exciting. By contrast, the resources available to the police to find a missing woman who is not famous are not vast, and people are not as interested. I spent a lot of time in the writing of Idyll Hands, trying to capture the sense of detailed work that goes into following sightings, and leads, and tips, and crank calls that missing persons cases always generate. Because there are 2 cases in the book, there's also the trouble of trying to identify a corpse that's found in the woods and match it potentially to a missing persons report that was filed earlier. That's working backwards, as it were. In this scene, I'm going to read you Lewis and Michael, the 2 detectives that you met earlier, are trying to discover who the corpse in the woods is, and they're sifting through years' worth of missing persons reports to do so. The only real details they have on this person is that the corpse is likely a white woman, and she has some distinctive dental work, namely a gold crown on her tooth. So this is, again, Michael Finnegan speaking. 19 women were collected on my desk, missing from as far north as Millinocket, Maine, and as far south as Norwalk, Connecticut. Of course, our Colleen, as we still called her, might have come from outside New England, but we had to start with some limits. 6 of the 19 were from abusive families and in foster situations or juvenile homes. That didn't mean one of them couldn't be our girl, but given the gold crown, it seemed unlikely. 13 women, 2 were married, 10 had pierced ears. I looked up. Pierced ears? Wright pursed his lips. He looked for the medical examiner's report, found it, turned it, page by page. They found earrings in the grave. The lobes were long gone. Great. I set aside the non-pierced women, knowing that perhaps the question had been answered incorrectly or never asked. We narrowed the field based on what we knew, but we'd found errors. A woman was excluded because she was too tall. Then we found there were varying heights reported, as different as 4 inches. Another set aside because she fell outside our date range, later found to have been mixed into the wrong year by the police who'd sent the file. That one had made Lewis kick a cabinet and ask what we were supposed to do if we couldn't trust the paperwork. God, I wish there was a national database for adults, he said, leaning away from the papers and stretching his arms overhead. No kidding. Missing kids had a national clearinghouse set up in 1984. Adults? Nope. Many adults left home because they wanted to, and no foul play was involved. No crime, no need to track them. But if we had the database, oh God, the time it would save. Consolidated reports nationally accessible, be still my beating heart. After several hours, I could recite the histories of the women whose pictures blurred before my eyes. Amy Holtz, 22 years old, played clarinet, owned a parrot, lived with 2 roommates on Cape Cod, went missing April 1980. Last seen leaving work at the Lighthouse Restaurant and Cafe. Roommate said she sometimes hitched rides home when she was tired. That day, she pulled a double. Had she gotten into the wrong car? Trusted the wrong person? Lewis said, I got my pile down to 12. You? 9, I think, if this one was alive as of late June 1983. I tapped Nancy Quarterman's picture. I think Colleen was buried earlier than that. Tex thinks so, Lewis said. They think they narrowed the burial date by remnants of the jeans she was wearing. Really? I missed that report. What brand? Sasson. I sang, ooh la la, Sasson. Lewis looked at me like I'd sprouted a hydra head. Come on, you don't remember those ads? They had that one with the New York Rangers where the players skated in their jeans. Must have been before my time, he said. Hardly. He said anyway, the jeans didn't exist before 1975, and that body couldn't have been there after July 1983 because the bone you found belongs to the corpse. The victim was put there between 1975 and 1983, I said. Correct. That didn't eliminate anyone from my pile, but it might prove useful later. By the by, that thing about the jeans is an excellent example of braggerly research. I went down a research rabbit hole about designer jeans. I spent hours reading articles and watching ads, including that New York Rangers ad. And I learned so much about the history of designer denim. And all of that work was distilled into that very brief scene, which I just read you. So sometimes when I am working on a book, I whisper to myself when I'm doing things like this, research is not writing, because you can lose a lot of time to research. I got some of the dental expertise in this from my hygienist while she was x-raying my teeth. So it was time to get x-rayed, and I asked her about gold and silver, could you tell the difference? And she said, actually, identifying that stuff, precious metal types, was on her dental exam. So people have so much useful information. Writers in the audience, take note. Now, much of what I've been discussing is sad and more than a little depressing. So I wanted to include something that wasn't. Because a lot of writing books is about varying the emotional seesaw of the story. Next time you read a book, you should pay attention, because it's really kind of fascinating, to how very awful things are often reversed into happier or more satisfying scenes, and then back to awful. Because this unstable emotional footing, or feelings quicksand, as I like to call it, is how we authors keep you readers interested in turning pages. Books where it's just misery after misery, or happy, happy, happy all the time, tend to bore us past a certain age. So some of the scenes I enjoy writing the most, that I find fun, are Mrs. Dunsmore's rants, because those things just pour out of me. But I also enjoy scenes where very silly small town crimes are highlighted, because they are fun and fascinating. So I'm going to talk about that part of the book. Over 2 years ago, I read a news article from Tiverton, Rhode Island, about neighbors who were complaining about clamshells. Their neighbor had created an access road by having a truck just dump a load of clamshells down to create a path. However, from the smell, it was quickly determined that the clamshells had not been washed properly. It stank, and they said that the shells still had meat attached to them. So it was attracting maggots, and it was awful. And I thought, that is amazing. Let's use that in the next book. So this is a scene where Michael Finnegan and Louis Wright, who we've met, are talking to Officer Dix in the clamshells case, which is the hot crime in Idyll, is discussed. So this is Finnegan again talking. I said, if you'll excuse us, Dix, we have important work to do. Lunch was important. Second most important meal of the day. Dix called, oh yeah, what? Another house party thrown by sophomores? Did you find the catch who's ever been tossing clamshells along Piper Street? Who does that? Louis asked, not for the first time. Those things stink and they're covered in maggots. I'd only driven past the carnage. Louis was head of the investigation. Lucky guy. Someone on that street pissed off someone, and the pissed off someone has access to a lot of clamshells, I said, for the 6th time, or was it the 7th? I've talked to everyone who lives on that street, Louis said. He held up his hand. 80-year-old widower who makes World War II dioramas. He curled his index finger to his palm. Young married couple with a set of twins. He curled down his middle finger. The couple who run the dry cleaners, the Sylvanos. Maybe they ruined someone's shirt, Dick said. I looked into customer complaints, he said. None of them were that angry. And none of the complainers owned a clam farm or a boat. Next up, we have the Jacks family. He curled in his ring finger, which told me he discounted them as targets. Hey, the Jacks kid is the QB of the Idyll Marauders. Maybe someone doesn't like his record, Dick said. They were 10-1 last year, Louis said. Besides, the clamshells appeared the last week of April, not during football season. Maybe the QB broke some hearts, Dick suggested. That's possible, I said. Teen girls can be aggressive in their displays of anger. Dick said, you still on about those posters? We got them down quick. Quickly, I corrected out of habit. Stacy McMore might have a different view. Her parents did. They wanted the girls who'd hung the posters branding their daughter a slut arrested. You think it's a rampaging band of teen girls, Louis asked. On the face of it, sure, I said, why not? I had a daughter and I remembered her teen years. They were not filled with sugar, spice, and everything nice. They were filled with sulky looks, hormonal exchanges, and heartbreaking episodes of self-doubt inspired by peer pressure. Thinking about small crimes makes me realize that I don't think there are a lot of petty shenanigans in Agatha Christie's works. It's all murder, murder, abduction, murder. Whatever happened to vandalism? Okay, so let's travel back in time to 1926. In investigating Agatha Christie's disappearance, the police soon learned that her life was not a super happy fun time. Her mother had died months earlier and Agatha had cared for her, having to go back to her earlier home, so she'd not had a great run of it. And her husband, whom she married during the Great War, was cheating on her with a woman named Nancy Neal. The day that Agatha drove off, her husband had left the house to spend the weekend with this side piece. He'd also been asking Agatha for a divorce, which she denied because she didn't believe in it. So things seemed to point to possible murder by husband, but maybe even slightly more to suicide. Nearly a week after she'd gone missing, guests at the Swan Hydropathic Hotel in Yorkshire reported that a guest, a Mrs. Teresa Neal, same name as the mistress, that's right, looked a lot like Agatha Christie from the newspaper photos splashed everywhere. Teresa Neal claimed to be from South Africa and to be a bereaved mother. Even stranger, she had placed an advertisement in the Times asking, "Friends and relatives of Teresa Neal, late of South Africa, please communicate. Write Box R702, The Times, EC4. When guests noted the resemblance, she laughed it off, but people say she followed the news story very closely. The police followed up and found that Mrs. Teresa Neal was Agatha Christie. When they confronted her, Agatha claimed to have suffered amnesia and had no idea who she was. Even better, when her husband showed up to identify her, she recognized him as her brother. They had a quiet tete-a-tete, she and her husband, and then Archie Christie, her husband, emerged and declared that his wife had suffered a complete loss of memory and did not know who she was. Many people did not buy the amnesia story. There were too many incongruities that pointed to her knowing who she was. And as I understand it, people suffering from fugues or amnesia don't suddenly reimagine themselves as completely new people with a filled-in backstory. They also don't have the same last name as their cheating husband's mistress. Amazingly, and because it was 1926, she was able to refuse to discuss it further. When she wrote her autobiography, she didn't include anything related to her disappearance. She wouldn't discuss it during the next 50 years of her life. And it is reported that when a few friends asked her too many questions, she cut them out of her life entirely. That's so baller. A lot of police investigating is discovering evidence and establishing facts, timelines, alibis, where the weapon came from, but some of it is imaginative. Just as the police did in the search for Agatha Christie, so too must police work their imaginations in a missing persons case. Why might the person have disappeared? Was she depressed? Where might she have gone if she intended to go into hiding? It's putting yourself into another person's framework and trying to find the one real path they took or were taken out of. So I'm going to read you now a scene in which Police Chief Thomas Lynch, who is investigating the now 27-year-old case of Susan Finnegan's disappearance, he finds himself trying to imagine what happened to Susan. He has access to all of the files that her brother kept. He's reviewed most of it, and he has found lots of leads that they don't go anywhere. So the trail is cold, and he is just trying to come up with new ideas. Back to the beginning. What do we know? Susan had run away from home. She'd taken clothes, her favorite stuffed animal, and a lucky rabbit's foot. The rabbit's foot I'd found in Finney's box wasn't Susan's. It had been found in a car searched for drugs. Finney was sure it belonged to his sister, but the sad fur was dyed a bright purple. Later, he'd noted that Susan's had sported pink fur. He'd been mistaken. The token had never been returned to its owner. Her bank account had been wiped out. She'd taken her money, all $160 of it. Hard to start a new life on $160, even in 1972. She told her family she was staying at Lucy's, but her cover was blown by Monday morning when she didn't appear at school. Everyone assumed she'd run away for good. But what if she planned to be gone for only that weekend? What if she planned to reappear Monday at school? No one would have been the wiser. Where would she have gone for a weekend? Away with a boyfriend? It was clear Father James Finnegan possessed old-fashioned views on dating. But Susan wouldn't be the first teenager to figure out how to see someone behind her dad's back. She leaves home to spend a weekend with Mr. Right, only he turns out to be Mr. Wrong and he kills her? It was a stretch. I leaned back and stared at my ceiling. It hadn't changed since yesterday. Go figure. Outside, I heard kids playing tag. The clock wrote 8:25 a.m. Damn. Time to shower and dress. A car door slammed. A baby cried. Baby. I stopped in the hallway. What if Susan was pregnant? I looked behind me at the boxes on the floor. Pregnant. In 1972. That was pre-Roe v. Wade, right? Her options would be limited. Have the baby, give it up for adoption, or go somewhere where illegal operations were done. If Susan had been pregnant, who would she have told? No one in the family knew. Who would she have told? The baby's father? Her best friend. I thought of Rick, my former homicide partner in New York, now dead. We'd kept each other's secrets. He'd never told anyone I was gay, and I covered up his drug addiction. Maybe we shouldn't have kept each other's secrets, but we had. Now Rick was gone. Lucy McManus, Susan's best friend, had married and moved to Portland, Maine. She was now Lucy Rogers. Finnegan had stayed in touch. His last notes regarding her were from 1993, 6 years ago. Her telephone number was on a paper inside one of the boxes. She was still at the same number if she hadn't moved in the past 6 years. If. So many questions. In some ways, even more than with a homicide, because at least with a homicide, you have an established crime. With a missing person, not so much. Maybe they're alive and well and selling pottery in another state under another name. Maybe they're buried in the woods. Maybe not. It's impossible to know. And sometimes, even when you have answers, you still have questions, which leads me back to Agatha Christie. She claimed to the end of her days she'd suffered a fugue state amnesia. But many people think she drove her car intending to commit suicide and found she couldn't do it, especially with her young daughter to care for. Still others think she was trying to make her husband look bad to throw suspicion on him, and that it worked, but too well. The story grew larger, they say, than she could control. In 1934, under the pseudonym Mary Westmacott, she wrote a novel called Unfinished Portrait, featuring a character named Celia. And Celia bears some resemblance to Christie. Of Celia's aborted suicide attempt, she wrote, she admitted it had been very wicked of her to try. And then she goes on to write of Celia's faithless husband, that if he could be treacherous, then anyone could be treacherous. The world itself became unsure. I couldn't trust anyone or anything anymore. That's horribly frightening. Agatha Christie is probably the first mystery writer I read religiously. Sadly, I began reading her at far too young an age. I read the books when I stayed at my Nana and Papa's house. Lots of the Poirot novels and I think a couple of the others. I did not understand the British phrases. When they said torch for a flashlight, I thought they meant torch. I couldn't understand why the villagers and the police persisted in running around with sticks on fire when they could use less dangerous and better tools. The plotting, which can be puzzle-like, was way too developed for my still growing childish brain. But I must have liked something about them because I read so many of them, book after book. This past year, I read Sparkling Cyanide, which is not one of the series novels. And I realized it was probably the first time I'd read Christie in decades. And aside from the casual racism, which is always a not delightful surprise in Agatha Christie, prepare yourselves if you want to pick up one, I was amazed at how interesting and not by the rules her book was. There are multiple points of view, there are shifts in the points of view from first to third, and there's an intricate plot that I kept thinking, like, I'm a mystery writer, I'm gonna get this one. And I kept guessing, and I only got it half right. It was a really good book. The thing I like most about Christie's disappearance is that I quite believe she engineered it. Even if she set off to commit suicide, she didn't. And every choice she made from there, to abandon the car and walk to take a train and to check into a hotel under a false name, it was all her plot. And yes, she was found, but she was hiding in plain sight. She had told multiple people, including her secretary, she was going to Yorkshire, and she did. Within 2 years after this event, she and her husband divorced, and she married archaeologist Sir Max Mallowan, who has an amazing name, and they were, by all accounts, much happier. Too often, missing persons cases don't end happily. I think it's part of why I like the story of Agatha's disappearance so much. She had agency. She did what she wanted. She wasted a lot of police resources, not to be overlooked. But in the end, she made the mistress have to escape on a cruise to avoid the publicity that story generated. And she refused to talk about it for like 50 years. In today's age of social media and TMZ, it is impossible, or certainly implausible, to imagine anybody can get away with that. I think that's why I like it so much. And today, I was talking about this talk on Twitter. My friend and fellow writer, Lori Raider Day, tweeted, "I am a fan of Aggie's," I love that she calls Agatha Christie Aggie, "Aggie's F.U. fugue state."